the food and agricultural sector, but also tourism, industrial development, ecosystems, etc. And trying to the key role of water as an integrator across these systems and manage it in a way that interlinkages are facilitated. That brings in many stakeholders and makes very complicated processes because each of these different systems or sectors have their own set of stakeholders, they have their own set of policies that very often are not well aligned. So that makes it quite a complicated process. And it's particularly complicated in large river basins like the Indus Basin, and Pakistan is sharing its water resources with a number of neighbors, which makes it then the integrated management particularly difficult because of the need of the integration across borders, not only across sectors. If I may, from what I learned yesterday, and of course over the discussions over the last years, a few particularly challenges for Pakistan that will come up in our session today include the strive towards industrialization in Pakistan, which is strong, which has huge implication on water abstractions, groundwater in particularly, but also on water storage and water quality and the impacts for water quality in ecosystems. The urbanization that is going on with cities are growing and there's an additional demand for water, but also for treatment and for other resources that need to be addressed in integrated approaches, as well as the ecosystem challenges. Aquatic ecosystems, but also terrestrial systems are sometimes used in unsustainable ways, and that needs specific attention. This is what I wanted to say to kick the session off, and I'm looking forward to an interactive session in the next 90 minutes or so, less than 90 minutes. And it's a pleasure now to introduce Ms. Sarah Ransom from Australia. Ms. Ransom has extensive experiences in international development, particularly when it comes to water and development, as an Australian diplomat, as well as with the Asian Development Bank and UNDP. Her own technical background is in governance and gender, as well as monitoring and evaluation studies. And she worked extensively in Southeast Asia and South Asia, including the Mekong Basin, but also Indonesia and in other countries in the region. With this, I hand over to Ms. Ransom, and I'm looking forward to your presentation, Sarah. Over.
Thank you, Stefan. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, excellencies and participants. My name is Sarah Ransom. I'm the Partnerships and Impact Lead with the Australian Water Partnership, or AWP. The AWP is a water for development partnership supported by the Australian Department of Affairs and Trade. AWP mobilises Australia's internationally recognised expertise in water management to meet the vital water resource needs of developing countries in our region. In doing so, we advance Australia's international development and foreign policy objectives. AWP has provided, since its inception in 2015, technical assistance to strengthen water resource management in some 30 countries in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Our AWP's strength is in our partnership. We have over 220 Australian partners plus international partners. And I'm honoured today to be here alongside some of our valued partners from the International Water Management Institute, ADB and AIFA, in support of work they have done to assist Pakistan to progress sustainable and climate resilient solutions in water resource management. Our partnership in Pakistan has supported the development of integrated water resource management, a holistic approach which is highly relevant today as we plan ahead for resilience to climate change driven challenges. The integration in IWRM asks us to consider how water interacts with biophysical and built environments, as well as with other sectors, including land, agriculture, and food security, through the lens of maximising social and ecological benefits. IWRM requires careful thought about how different social groups will be impacted by and can contribute to sustainable water management, particularly vulnerable groups such as women, people with disability, and other social minorities. This, as Stefan has already said, is a complex task, and IWRM elevates coordination and governance as critically important. Good governance will enhance the collaboration, transparency, and data sharing and the cohesive legislative frameworks that are needed to achieve resilience. IWRM advocates for systems thinking as well when dealing with the resources available to government. Institutions need to be empowered to work together to ensure predictable, easy to access and sustainable financing. And government institutions need to be able to continuously engage stakeholders through sometimes very difficult change to increase the chance that water management is sustainable, not only ecologically, but socially and politically as well. Australia has faced and continues to face some similar challenges to Pakistan. There are some obvious similarities between our two countries. Technical water challenges in managing aridity, groundwater, river basins and floods, which extend to food security challenges, for example. But Australia also has experience to share in the less visible but equally important governance aspects of IWRM. These can often relate back to issues like building engagement across diverse government agencies, stakeholder groups and decision makers, and managing difficult trade-offs, including by considering environmental benefits from water management or compromising when different priorities are competing, and communicating these benefits of reforms from the start. This has not always been an easy path for Australia, but we have made some notable steps forward and are keen to share practical insights. AWP's water partners hold a lot of this lived experience, and we are honoured to be able to share some of this with Pakistan. AWP support in Pakistan aligns with the central principles of IWRM through emphasising this integrated and modern approach to governance. It is an approach that requires constant reflection and evaluation to see what worked, what didn't, and why. Many countries are actively learning in this area, and we believe international cooperation is critical to provide opportunities to share this learning. It is excellent that we'll be hearing from international experts today, such as Ms. Amy Sidwood from AITA on the Australian experience, and Dr. Sun Youngbo, who will share experience, I believe, from the Yellow River Basin in China. AWP, with engagement in countries across the region, sees learning opportunities like Pakistan Water Week as absolutely central to achieving sustainable water management. IWRM is an important approach, but it is demanding on managers, leaders, and government. Sharing experience will help us all to meet the challenges of improving governance. I'm very much looking forward to this event. Thank you to the organisers, and I wish you great success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This was a very good introduction. And we continue now with the three keynote speakers. And the first one is Professor Nick van der Giessen. Professor Nick van der Giessen is a professor for water management at the Technical University Delft in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, he not only had problems to get into Pakistan for the event today, he's also traveling and at a place where the internet connection is not so strong or reliable. You will see that in a minute. And therefore, he sent his keynote as a video. And we're looking forward to listen to Professor van der Giessen, who has extensive experience in Africa, the US, some Asian countries, as well as in Europe and the Netherlands in particular. And the Netherlands is one of the countries, as Australia, China, many others, UK and Germany and so on, where there's a lot of innovative water management going on, and we're looking forward to listen to his experiences. And over to Usman now, who will show us this video. Please, Dr. Usman.
Thank you, Stefan. We are just playing it.
Hello, my name is Nick van der Giessen. I'm Professor of Water Resources.
I can't hear it yet.
Hello, my name is Nick van der Giessen. I'm Professor of Water Resources Engineering at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. And Dr. Hafiz asked me to give a brief introduction to integrated water resources management, 10 minutes or so. Unfortunately, I cannot join in person, so I wish you all a very good morning. But due to connectivity problems and differences in time zones, we'll have to do it like this. But I'd be happy to answer any questions or remarks that you may have by mail. Of my talk, I'll say something about integrated water resources management as opposed to other approaches, maybe more single issue approaches. I'll introduce a few concepts, some tools, and I say a few words in the end about the practice of IWRM, because that's also very relevant. Yes, an important thing to realize when we're dealing with IWRM that it also contains standard approaches to water resources management, so more single issue approaches, if you may say so. So you definitely have to have a good understanding of the physical environment, the hydraulics, the hydrology, the ecology of a system, if that's part of the problem. So we cannot ignore the physical environment. It's not just talking IWRM, it's also very much analyzing, calculating, working through models, etc. This is also why we have to bring our mathematical tools. We do a lot of dynamical modeling. You need to know numerics, also other technical things like remote sensing, geographical information system. These are all very relevant when you work with integrated water resource management. With these tools, we can sort of model or describe, if you want, what I call the ecophysical domain, the one that engineers are typically quite confident with and also comfortable with. It's about space and time, and things move, and we can calculate those, we can extrapolate, we understand the dynamics, and we can model those. However, IWRM is not just this. We also need to know something about the human decisions that are being made, and that is a dimension that's completely different from the physical, chemical, or the domain, and this makes IWRM especially difficult, very complex, because people, as you may know, have a tendency to make things very difficult. Different people have different ideas, different people have different interests and different solutions, etc. And that makes it very complex very quickly. Okay, and that means that we also have to understand a little bit of the social environment. Now, we don't have to become lawyers, but we have to be aware at least of things like law, economics of things, the public administration of the area that we're working in, maybe some traditional management styles, etc., etc. So we have to be aware at least of the social environment if we want to do proper integrated water resources management. And there it differs definitely from more single level approaches, like maybe just making sure that there's a well or just making sure that there's a reservoir. When it comes to IWRM, we have to be much more aware of all these different aspects of reality. Now, about some concepts, we should not make it too difficult. Integrated water resource management is just that. We integrate a number of things. Now, even when you have just one goal, let's say you want to irrigate, often you have the choice of many interventions, and you integrate those into one big solution. That's not yet IWRM. The point with IWRM is that there are also many issues. So there's not just drought, so you need irrigation. No, there might also be flooding. You might want to generate hydropower. We have to worry about nature and ecology, drinking water, navigation, you name it. And that's actually why people start to do IWRM. There's so many roles that water has to play and that water does play. So as soon as water becomes scarce, you cannot say, oh, we just use water for one issue. We just use water for irrigation. No, you will have to use water for many different issues or many different needs. And that's where the real integration and the real difficulty comes in. So instead of just having a reservoir for hydropower, maybe you also want to do something with flood management with that. And maybe you also want to make sure that there's irrigation water in the dry season with that same reservoir. Okay, in these for the concepts, we don't have too much of a theory, I would say, but it's important to be somewhat aware of the history. Here you see some landmark events in the past that sort of were important in the development of IWRM. I especially would like to mention the Dublin Conference in 1990. Also, the Second World Water Forum in The Hague was very important because in that moment it became clear, it was at least recognized that water was not just a technical problem, it was not just an economic problem, it's also a political problem. And that was sort of the big thing in in The Hague in 2000, 21 years ago. There's been many meetings before, since then. Not much has really moved too much in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. It's quite well established what needs to be done. So we don't need to worry too much more about theoretical development, I would say. Still, it's good to be aware of some, let's say, strategic issues that we're trying to address. I'm not going to read them out, all of them, but one of them, an important one, are the Dublin principles. I'll come back to that. But here I just want to highlight, for example, that we typically use a river basin approach. So administratively, rivers are usually boundaries. So on one side of a river is a different country or a different province from the other side of the river. And so we see it as something that divides things. Now, for IWRM, it doesn't matter if water comes from the left bank or from the right bank. You have to take both into account. So we typically take a river basin approach, which is not natural for many administrators or politicians to do. Then we come to some tools. A very important tool, there's not many, but there's several tools to deal with watersheds and distributing water between different goals or different users. An important one that we like to work with a lot is called the WEEP, Water Evaluation and Planning. It's by the Stockholm Environmental Institute. It's freely available for most people. And it's a very intuitive system where the logic of the watershed clearly comes forward. It's especially good at handling different scenarios, what if scenarios, what if climate changes this way, what if the population doubles in 30 years, etc., etc. So it's especially good at the evaluation part and the visualization for towards stakeholders. This is what it typically looks like. A screen, you see, it's very simple. It's a linked node network where you combine different water users with different water sources, and you let the program then calculate what happens exactly, how much water is available where, and how that would all work. It's very useful. I strongly suggest you have a look at it if you are interested in IWRM. There's quite some literature on it, but the thing I would recommend most is a book from earlier from this century by Piet Laux and Eelco van Beek. It is very complete, so it's very nice to see what's all in there. I don't think it's freely available on the internet if you search for it. So I would suggest that you use this if you want to know a little bit more about maybe some of the underlying tools, such as other things like stakeholder analysis or economic analysis. You'll find very nice, very brief introductions, but very comprehensive treatment of all these things in this book. Then finally, some words on the practice of IWRM. It may be a little bit daunting when you start, but it's important to understand that the integration that you do is not integration for the sake of integration, but it's integration that it's need-driven. It's very clear. It needs to be very clear why you want to integrate different goals in your approach. Sometimes it's maybe IWRM is seen as something of a fashion and something that is fashionable and that maybe donors like it. That's not the point. You really need to be convinced of the fact that you cannot use the same amount of water twice, and that you will need to come to an integrated approach, and that is definitely a necessity and not a luxury. You will typically work in interdisciplinary teams. You need a lot of skills around the table. Still stay focused on the problems. Don't become distracted by other discussions. Bring, as an engineer or as a technical person, bring your basic skills to the table. So you have to be good in your hydraulics and your hydrology, your math, but you also have to be able to apply those to real-world problems, and this is what you bring to the table. At the same time, you have to listen to other disciplines. Now, this is not something we necessarily always learn, but it's very interesting, actually, very exciting and very energizing to learn from other disciplines. So I've worked, for example, on health projects. Now, it's very interesting to learn about, for example, malaria, how that all works, and how epidemics work and stuff like that. So it's very, very good to learn to listen to other disciplines. You don't have to become a specialist, but you have to be able and willing to understand the basics of other disciplines and also see how they help solve the problems that you're trying to solve. You have to be also realistic. So sometimes as engineers, we tend to be a little bit, oh yeah, it's just a technical problem. Let me just calculate it and we have the solution. No, there's limitations to engineering approaches and we have to be able to explain them to the other people around the table that try to find the solution. In general, however, I would say don't worry too much about the concepts. Don't worry too much about the theory. It's very clear why we have to move towards integrated water resource management. So I would almost say in the practice, just do it. Start doing it. Start learning from other people. Start working on these issues and move forward. And that's can be a very rewarding experience, both intellectual, but also especially economically, because you get the most out of the scarce water resources that you have. Thank you very much. And again, if you have any questions or remarks, please send me a mail and I'd be happy to come back to you about those.
Thank you very much. In case you are with us in the webinar, we enjoyed your presentation for introducing IWRM. I hand over directly to the next keynote speaker, and I would like to invite Dr. Sung Yang Bo. He's the director of the Division for International Cooperation at the Yellow River Conservancy Commission, which is part of the Ministry of Water Resources in China. Mr. Yang Bo has some 30 years of experiences in working in planning, research studies, but also policy-related work to river basin planning in the Yellow River Basin in particular. He has been responsible for carrying out multilateral and bilateral cooperation projects, and he has been involved in quite a number of different policy dialogues, scientific research related to water projects, but also knowledge sharing and promoting partnerships. He serves in a number of committees, including the River Committee. He's a member of the River Committee, which is an initiative of the Future of Great Rivers, and he's the executive secretary of the International Yellow River Forum. Over to you, Mr. Yang Bo.
Oh, thank you very much, Stefan. First, I want to thank the Pakistan Water Week and ADB giving me the opportunity to speak on the session of integrated water resources management. Actually, we have been working together with ADB to develop a holistic approach for Yellow River protection and development recently. So it's really good for me to join the conference, not only to showcase the water security study of Yellow River, but also to learn the knowledge and experience from other places in the world, like Pakistan, Australia, Netherlands. And we knew Pakistan has a very long history of water governance, especially in irrigation management and flood mitigation. So in that respect, China and Pakistan share a lot of similar experience. So congratulations to the Pakistan Water Week and the best wishes from China. So we start. The Yellow River of China is a very unique and complex basin and presents an entire set of challenges, ranging from complex hydrology to water management and ecological issues. The Yellow River originates from Tibetan Plateau and flows through 9 provinces of North China before emptying itself into the sea. It's the second longest river of China, and more than 400 million people live in the Yellow River Basin. The river flows through a very dry area with average rainfall between 400 to 600 millimeters every year. The Yellow River suffers the most from the soil erosion and the river sedimentation. It was once to be the #1 in the world's largest rivers in respect of its sediment transportation, which amounts to 1.6 billion tons every year. We say the Yellow River, the mother river of China, which means it has many significant importance to China. First, its economic importance. The basin is the food basket of China, feeding its 12% population with only 2% of the country's water resources, produce 30% of food and meat production of the country. And the river irrigates about 15% of farmlands. supply water to more than 60 large cities. The basin's gross regional product was some 24 trillion Chinese yuan, accounting for 26% of the national GDP. The Yellow River Basin is also an important area for energy, chemical, and industrial production in China. And number two, the Yellow River, extending across China from west to east, is also an ecological corridor connecting highlands, mountains, deserts, lakes, floodplain, and wetlands from upstream to downstream. It has a whole range of natural and environmental assets, which subject to national and international importance. And number three, as the cradle of the Chinese civilization, the Yellow River Basin is also the birthplace of Chinese culture and civilization. The Yellow River is the political, economic, and cultural center of China for more than 2,000 years. It has many historic sites and cultural heritages. And here is a timeline of Yellow River water resources management. Chinese people has been living together with the Yellow River for thousands of years. Since ancient times, Chinese people has struggled against the Yellow River floods and droughts, and to develop irrigation and navigation on the river. For the Yellow River Conservation Commission, which I've been working for, it was established as the River Basin Authority in 1946. In the past 70 years, large-scale infrastructures have been constructed in the Yellow River Basin. For hydropower development, the first power station was built in 1953, and at the present, we have already built more than 570 hydropower stations in the basin. The cumulative power generation reaches 1,300 billion kilowatt hour. For flood management, we have completed the embankment and dike system along the river with total length of 17,000 kilometers long. For irrigation, we have developed some 68 large-scale irrigation districts in the upper, middle, and lower Yellow River, with total irrigation area of 7.5 million hectares. The agricultural water use is still the biggest water user in the Yellow River Basin, although it has been decreased from 85% to 68% in the past 30 years. However, along with the rapid social and economic growth in China in the past decades, environmental pressure become very significant challenges since 1990s, that's 30 years ago. That's water scarcity, water pollution, soil erosion, and come together with ecological degradation. All these pressures and challenges have requested us to change the way of Yellow River management. Since the year 2000, we gradually transformed from engineering construction period to the protection of the Yellow River. And the target is to restore the river flow and keep the healthy life of the Yellow River. I think 20 years ago, we have a lot of cooperations with Australian partners and also with the Netherlands institutes, including TU Delft, the Deltars, and also IWMI from Australia, to build a healthy river for the Yellow River. After 20 years of endeavor and efforts, the Yellow River has been rejuvenated. The water quality and ecosystem has been improved significantly. Well, when we look back, we found that the Yellow River management is a very dynamic process, which is closely linked to the socio-economic and environmental conditions. But then when we look to the future, the Yellow River water management will play an essential strategic role in guaranteeing the food security, energy security, and ecological security, as well as the social and economic development of the country. So Chinese government has already set a vision of ecological protection and high quality development of the Yellow River Basin as a goal for the next stage from 2020 to 2035. And YRCC is responsible to develop the action plan for guaranteeing the water security in the Yellow River Basin, which is a major initiative to improve the multi-level and multi-dimensional efforts for an integrated river basin management. Since March of 2020, that's last year, YRCC started a comprehensive water security assessment of the Yellow River Basin with the support of ADB. The purpose is to develop the water resources development plan of the Yellow River Basin through conducting dialogues with local authorities to develop different scenarios and assessing the situation of water security in the basin and drafting policy and recommendations. The water security assessment mainly focused on 5 key dimensions. The definition structure of the key dimensions and indicators are based on the ADB's ADO approach, ADO 2016, but also being adjusted to specially address the issues of the Yellow River Basin. The first key dimension is for water supply security. It describes the water availability and regulation capacity of the basin and the access to safe drinking water for the rural population. The Yellow River Basin is an area of extreme water shortage. In recent years, the natural runoff has been declining and the current water resources development and utilization has far exceeded the carrying capacity. Some areas lack the facilities or have no access to water, and some cities lack backup water resources for emergency use. The second key dimension is economic water security. It measures the efficiency of the water use in the economic and the domestic sector. The main problem here is reflected in 3 aspects. First, the level of conservation and efficient utilization of water resources needs to be improved. And saving water first is the primary water policy in the Yellow River Basin. Water supply and productive capacity also needs to be improved. And the last but not least is the spatial planning, spatial balance in water resources management should also be taken into account to balance upstream and downstream, industrial, energy, and agricultural sectors. The third dimension is for ecological water security. Due to the fragile ecosystem and the impact of human activities, the Yellow River Basin is currently facing ecological and environmental problems, such as low water retention capacity in the headwater region, and serious soil erosion in the middle ridge, and permanent pollution problems in tributaries, and a low ecological flow in the lower ridge, and shrinking natural water wetlands in the delta area. So the next dimension is for environmental water security. It addresses the water quality situation in the basin. Although the prevention and control of water pollution in the river basin has been strengthened in recent years, and the water ecological environment has improved to a certain extent, but there are still some permanent problems like, the water pollution is still serious, and how to balance economic and social development against the carrying capacity of the river. Water pollution treatment and governance needs to be improved, and the protection of drinking water resources also needs to be strengthened. The fifth key dimension, the last one, is for the water-related disaster security. It addresses the risks of the floods and droughts. The Yellow River is still under the threat of large floods with the increase of meteorological instability. The risks of excessive flood beyond the flood control standards still remain in the Yellow River, in particular in the lower reaches. Actually, this summer, a record-breaking rainfall hit Zhengzhou City, where we live, in July, with 200 millimeter precipitation in 1 hour, immediately flooded urban area, roads, tunnels, and the subway, which crashed the public transportation system of the city and caused chaos and significant property loss. So, for overall water security index, is calculated by summing up all the 5 components in 5 key dimensions. And this figure shows that some provinces are doing well in some key dimensions, but also need to improve in other key dimensions. Water security action plan and policies. So based on the assessment, we are now working on the water security action plan and policies. Water as a lifeline of the Yellow River is a core element for its ecological protection and high quality development of the Yellow River Basin. In the basin, shortage in water resources is the most prominent conflict, unlike any other river basins. Vulnerability of the ecosystem is the biggest problem, and flood and river sedimentation are the greatest threats. It's urgently needed to lay a solid foundation for guarantee water security, for ecological protection and high quality development of the Yellow River Basin by introducing innovative ideas for management of the Yellow River and building institutional capacity building strengthening. To achieve water security for the Yellow River Basin is a big challenge. Economic growth and climate change will exaggerate these challenges. This action plan proposes measures to guarantee water supply security, economic water security, ecological water security, environmental water security, and also the resilience to water-related disasters in the basin, and put forward recommendations on institutions and government dimensions. Creating the enabling conditions. So the previous slide shows the proposed actions for more water secure basin, but many of these actions have impacts on other key dimensions, and implementing these actions will have to be done in an integrated way and based on the basic principles for integrated water resources management. The enabling conditions makes it possible to implement physical and economic measures and also enforce regulations. Although many of these conditions are already in place in the Yellow River, but there is still a need to be further strengthened to ensure water security. Here are some key instruments adopted in recent years in China to promote integrated water resources management, which includes policies and legislations, institutions and coordination, and management, and also with management instruments. For example, the river and lake chief system in place by the year 2016, National Water Conservation Action Plan by the year 2019, Eco Compensation Scheme for this year 2021, and also the Master Plan Guidelines for Ecological Protection and High Quality Development in the Yellow River Basin for this year. And also the Yellow River Protection Law was expected to be issued by the year 2022, next year. Okay, for the last slide, I would like to also to mention some links between the Yellow River water management with global water governance. In December 2019, YRCC hosted a seminar in China on SDG 6 implementation of Asian Pacific countries, which provided an opportunity for different countries to share practical experiences and enhance regional collaboration. China has made a commitment to the 2030 SDG goals. Yellow River Basin is also actively implementing the water goals of the SDG in terms of drinking water, sanitation, water quality, water use and scarcity, water management, and ecosystem protections. The Yellow River Water Security Action Plan from 2020 to 2035 is just aligned with the SDG goals, which makes it not only a local solution, but also a contribution to the global water governance. We all have a role to play in this, and particularly learning from each other's experience will help us to better understand and tackle any difficulties and challenges in the future. And with that, I shall conclude this presentation and thank you again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yangbo. This was very interesting. And I think the journey the Yellow River Commission went through from a commission dealing mainly with floods and irrigation requirements, but then increasingly integrating other aspects like hydropower, water economics, environmental requirements, and asking for much more integrated approaches is probably a journey that a number of river basins went through over the last decade. So I think we can all learn a lot from your experiences, and we would like to thank you for your contribution. We go to the third keynote speaker, and then there was more time for discussion, and it is a pleasure to introduce Mrs. Amy Sievrud. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Amy. Amy is a water policy practitioner, she says in her bios. She holds a master degree from about integrated water management from the International Water Center in Australia, but she also has earlier education from the University of Virginia in public policy and leadership. Now she's a principal at Ether, which is a global water advisory company, where she manages and supports quite a number of programs around the world. So she brings global experiences to the table with experiences from the Asia Pacific region, as well as North America, the Middle East, and South Asia. More recently, she has been involved in urban water security, roadmaps for Pakistan and two of the largest cities of Pakistan on behalf of the Australian Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade. She has also worked with the Nature Conservancy on the global freshwater strategy. Looking forward to your presentation. Over to you, Amy. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Stefan. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Sievrud. As Stefan said, I'm a principal at a global water advisory firm called Aether, where I'm currently based in the Washington, D.C. area in the USA, but many of my colleagues are based in Australia, and this includes Aether Director Will Farger, who is also on the line with us today and who worked closely with me on the project that I am about to share with you. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing the findings, outcomes, and insights that have resulted from a 20-month project that I managed in Pakistan and that recently concluded. I would like to express thanks to the Australian government for funding this work and to the Asian Development Bank for this opportunity to share about the project. So I look forward to your questions and subsequent discussions, and let's get into it. So starting at a high level, before I get into the details of the specific project, I wanted to set the context for why we think an IWRM approach is needed in Pakistan and why efforts at the city scale are important for supporting an IWRM approach. As we know, Karachi and Lahore are the largest and most densely populated cities in Pakistan. Both are experiencing steady population growth, and water resources in both cities is already severely stressed, with demand outstripping supply. These cities rely heavily on the Indus River Basin and its tributaries, including to replenish groundwater resources, particularly in the case of Lahore. And the cities also impact heavily on water quality through waste and stormwater management, or lack thereof, which of course has impacts on environmental and social values. The Indus also supports much of the rest of Pakistan's population, as well as Pakistan's agriculture sector and the environment. So Karachi and Lahore's challenges are connected to a much broader basin scale and resource management challenge. And actions to improve water scarcity or water security in each of these cities, which both put pressure on the Indus, could have significant upstream and downstream benefits within, but also beyond the city limits. In other words, to get IWRM right at the basin scale, we need to be doing things right at the city scale also. So in this presentation, I'll summarize our recent project work conducted at the city scale and draw some insights from that work and other related engagements outside of Pakistan to identify how adoption of IWRM principles and approaches at the city scale can lead to improved water governance and climate resilience. So I'll now jump into that project summary, starting with a recap of the project origins and outputs, and then a brief analysis of current and previous water security efforts in both cities, before finally presenting the results around where action should be prioritized going forward. So in terms of how this project originated, Pakistan, through the Ministry of Water Resources, and Australia, through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, signed a 5-year Memorandum of Understanding in 2018 to support Pakistan's transition towards integrated water resource management. Under this MOU, Pakistan selected urban water as one of the priority areas for attention. And given Australia's experience in managing scarce water resources and success in urban water reform, The Australian Water Partnership, as Sarah mentioned earlier, commissioned a consortium of Australian partners to prepare urban water diagnostics and urban water security roadmaps for the cities of Karachi and Lahore. So we refer to that as the Pakistan Water Diagnostic and Roadmaps Project, and it commenced in February 2020. And the objective of the project and its outputs was to assist provincial government departments and utilities in Karachi and Lahore to pursue and effectively implement highest priority actions for improving urban water security and in turn improving Indus Basin scale security more broadly. So the first step was to prepare these diagnostic reports for both Lahore and Karachi that identified and assessed urban water management challenges and opportunities for improvement. So following the development of these reports, our team engaged extensively with Pakistani partners to inform a roadmap document outlining those priority actions for improving water security in each city. We also developed some supplementary implementation plans for specific actions, including with preliminary cost estimates, timing and sequencing suggestions, and stakeholder responsibilities. While significant efforts have been made to address water security challenges in both Lahore and Karachi, including through policy development, data collection efforts, and infrastructure investment, there are barriers that have limited and that continue to limit the effectiveness of these solutions in practice. Capacity limitations, as well as political hurdles, have led to weaknesses in institutional coordination, data collection and management, policy and regulatory implementation, and accountability. National and provincial government bodies have taken major strides to develop appropriate legislation and regulation, which is of course necessary for effective water management, but not sufficient to enable adequate water sector performance. Most solutions designed and facilitated by external partners, such as development banks, have appeared to largely focus on master planning and infrastructure investment. And what we heard is that these efforts have often failed after the design phase, with little progress after years of planning as resources become depleted and/or political barriers arise. As a result, there is an urgent need to better coordinate actors and strategically direct investment to highest priority actions that hold the greatest potential for implementation success. Hence, that is exactly what the roadmaps intended to do. They present specific actions within priority action areas, as we call them, that Pakistani stakeholders identified as being most practical and impactful for improving water security outcomes in both cities. So you'll see that improving governance and institutional capacity is the first and also highest priority step to improving water security in a changing climate. This lends itself to being able to deliver on other priorities, all of which require strong governance in institutions in order to be successful. This requires an integrated approach at the city, provincial, and national level. And while strong institutions are needed to implement the other actions effectively, the other actions will also further strengthen the institutions. I'll explain each of these in a bit more detail on the next slide. As I mentioned, that first and most important priority area is to strengthen governance arrangements and build institutional capacity. While many of the policies required for a sound water management system in Karachi and Lahore exist, institutions have been unable to adequately enforce the laws and policies that they've created. And while new and improved development plans and laws continue to be created, there is agreement that these might be adding to the list of responsibilities that institutions already cannot adequately fulfill. So there's agreement that there's a need to more clearly and strategically define and reassign institutional responsibilities, to better coordinate federal, provincial, and local institutions, and to improve utility capacity in financial management, operations, and maintenance. To start, Pakistani partners have suggested knowledge sharing workshops on best practice institutional arrangements and the implementation of utility twinning programs for Lahore and Karachi's utilities, namely Lahore Water and Sanitation Agency, or WASA, and the Karachi Water and Sewerage Board, or KWSB. Secondly, while there are numerous initiatives and policies promoting improved water data collection in Lahore and Karachi and throughout Pakistan more broadly through the work of WAPDA and others, substantial work is required to capture legacy data to encourage wider adoption of compatible platforms across agencies, establish processes and protocols for data exchange, and to facilitate online public data access. To address these challenges, an agreed action is the development of a data collection and management strategy. This can set out an approach to improve the reliability, accuracy, transparency, and access of collected data and provide the basis for evidence-based decision-making. The third priority action area is utility planning and performance reporting. While many utility investments and activities have been identified under existing planning processes, Pakistani partners suggest that further assistance and investment are required to both prioritize and implement particular actions. As such, there was agreement on the need to develop a utility strategy accompanied by a contemporary framework for assessment of utility performance to enable a clear understanding of progress towards outcomes and priority performance areas for improvement going forward. It was also agreed that a customer relations strategy could help to meet KWSB's and Lahore WASA's organizational goals and foster open, transparent, and informed decision-making processes. Finally, to enable financial sustainability of KWSB's and WASA's services, it was agreed that an alternative tariff arrangement should be designed and implemented. And this should be informed by gender equality, disability, and social inclusion considerations, which can help ensure that user needs are met. However, it will be important that actions in the other areas are undertaken prior to tariff reform, as these will support the design and effective implementation of a new tariff arrangement. It is hoped that the implementation of the actions outlined in the roadmap documents will contribute significant benefits, including strengthened capacity and coordination between institutions, including to successfully respond to future climate or emergency shocks, the ability to direct data collection efforts to appropriately influence decisions, which in combination with a utility strategy can improve decision maker ability to make informed investment decisions that deliver desired long-term outcomes, including more resilient infrastructure. And tariff reform, supported by the other actions, should contribute to improved financial capacity of utilities to fulfill service delivery functions and achieve sustainable and resilient water and sanitation services. Again, strengthening governance arrangements in the first instance, which will strengthen institutional capacity and coordination, will support delivery of the other benefits shown here. Given the importance of getting water governance right in order to support climate resilience and IWRM, I wanted to share a couple of key learnings in this space from my and Aether's experience in Pakistan, in Australia, and elsewhere. So we all know why we need to manage water effectively. That's fairly obvious. We also know what types of policies and tools and methods we can use to manage water effectively. The options are constantly expanding, technologies are improving, and the evidence base for what works is growing. What often stands between the water sector and better outcomes from water, including in Pakistan's case, is how to move from policy to action and implementation to realize our objectives. In our experience, the common barriers that often prevent us from achieving our objectives tend to be related to the decision-making process. So not being clear on our objectives, not being consistent or transparent with our approaches, being rushed or reactive, making decisions without sufficient or reliable data, and not accounting for the full range of costs and benefits, particularly those that are hard to quantify. Good governance is central to overcoming these barriers, to making better decisions and implementing reforms. It is fundamental to how to achieve better water policy, management, investment, and use. It's important to recognize that when it comes to institutional reform, there may not be a single best approach. Often each country's arrangements reflect its unique physical aspects, its national and subnational governance arrangements, social and cultural norms, history, its future objectives. Professor Nick van de Giesen spoke about the importance of these characteristics in his presentation earlier. But there are key principles of good water governance, which are shown here. These are based on our own experience in assessing governance in other countries around the world and on our extensive knowledge of what's worked in Australia. Over the past 3 decades, Australia has undertaken significant institutional and governance reforms across the urban water sector in line with the principles outlined here. Australia's Productivity Commission has previously estimated that Australia's GDP was about 0.35% higher over the 1990s, due largely to institutional and pricing reforms in the urban water sector. While that might not sound like much, if gains of that magnitude have been maintained through to today, this would represent an annual economic gain of over 5 billion in today's dollars. So in short, institutional reforms in the urban water sector can in fact generate enormous benefits, not only economic, but also social and environmental, and not only for cities, but for the country. The agreed actions that I shared earlier were designed to support these principles. It's hoped that the implementation of the actions in the roadmaps will help Pakistan to overcome the barriers that are currently inhibiting positive outcomes and further generate benefits at the city, provincial, national, and even international scale. So I, Aether, and Australia, as Sarah spoke to earlier, look forward to continuing to collaborate with our Pakistani partners for a more sustainable water future and to sharing best practices and continuing to learn from each other. That concludes my presentation. My contact details are shown here. Please do feel free to get in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the interesting presentation. Finding your priority setting was quite interesting. We have a moment time for some questions for the 3 keynote speakers before we have Mr. Saif Anjum as a key discussant. Are there direct questions for our 3 presenters? And I kindly ask assistance from Dr. Usman, who's in the room, to moderate that if there's any questions from the audience in the room.
If someone has question.
And kindly use the microphone that we can hear you.
Yeah. ये काम नहीं कर रहा. Okay, there is one question, Stephen.
And we appreciate short questions and brief answers as well.
Yeah, very short question. I have a question about this Lahore and Karachi study and the urban water issues. My question is, even urban water is using, urban supplies are using in industry and lot in the commercial sectors and also for agriculture even. So this is not allocated. So my question is study also have done some work on the urban water use in different sectors, including irrigation? Secondly, it is affecting allocation. It's actually, this is first part of the study indicate to some extent water is transferred from the irrigation to the urban sectors now slowly. So is there some work on that part also? So some competition between the sector and the transfer of water among the sectors. Thank you.
Amy, over to you. I hope the question is clear.
I believe so. Thanks, Stefan, and thanks for that question. While we were very much focused at the urban scale, we did have conversations with the irrigation departments in both provinces and did have looks at the way that water is allocated between various sectors within each province. That said, we did narrow down the focus in our discussions with our Pakistani partners on the specific areas that they wanted to focus on at the urban scale. And it didn't get into that level of detail that would be required to facilitate that more cross-sectoral integrated approach that will be, required as we move forward as well to consider these reforms in that context. And so there is definitely more work to be done in this space, and it's an area that we flagged in those diagnostic reports, and there's actually an article that has just been published in MDPI Journal, and I'm happy to share that as well, that clearly articulates some more of the findings from this study and how that relates to some of the other cross-sectoral interdependencies. So thanks for that.
Thank you. Maybe you can share the link or the reference in the chat box as well of that article.
Will do, thanks.
Sure. Usman, it's very
Stephen,
difficult to
there is
moderate.
one more question.
Is there another question? Please, over.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to ask about this IWRM framework. Good presentation has been given from Chinese friend on Yellow River Basin. But my question is that our Indus River Basin system, we have different river morphology, sediment transportation, and then frequent floods. So how can we transform, how can we implement that IWRM, global IWRM framework to our Indus River Basin? What type of challenges are anticipated? Thank you.
This is clearly a question for Dr. Yangbu from the YRCC. Yangbu, please.
So thanks very much for these questions. I think there are some general principles for the integrated water resources management, but it has to be adapted to the local conditions and the situations. So for the Yellow River, because it's a long history for the water management, and China has the river is unique, and China has also its very unique system. I think the most important for the Yellow River governance is that first we adopt a kind of master plan approach, which means it's a top-down approach. From the central government, there is a vision and set a target for the Yellow River management. Say for next phase stage, we set ecological protection and high quality development as our first priority. So each ministries, each provinces, they are going to working on their own action plans in line with that master plan. So I think that kind of holistic approach to integrate different regions, different sectors, so they can work together to tackle the water challenges like the water scarcity and also the floods fighting. Besides, I think there is also a very important approach mentioned by Mr. Van der Heesen. He said we should take the river basin approach. That's exactly what we are doing in China. China has hundreds of thousands of large rivers, but we manage the water by the river basin authorities. There are 7 large river basin authorities. They are taking care of the water resources management for the whole part of China. So for the Yellow River Basin, we have a Yellow River Conservancy Commission, which acts on behalf of the central government, who is in the position to coordinate with different provinces from upstream to downstream to balance the needs from human and nature and balance the needs from different sectors. So I think basically there are 2 kind of instruments for your consideration. That's my humble idea. Thanks.
Thank you. This was very helpful.
Do you want to take one more question, Stephen?
One more, but I think we have to move on. Or how are we doing time-wise?
We are getting late.
More speakers. Yes, we're getting there. Over, please.
Thank you very much. I have one question to regarding the Yellow River project and its possible replication in the case of Indus Basin, particularly in the context of National Water Conservation Action Plan on Yellow River project, which was just mentioned. How can we, have you accounted for the rainfall, rainwater and the groundwater areas also, and how we can implement in our case? And same, the other small concern on Emmy's presentation regarding the water supply plan of Lahore particularly, where Lahore is on the bank of a Ravi river, which is more or less a river of sand or dry river, more or less, as far as. And are you going to consider the aspect of rainwater capturing and harvesting both on rooftop in case of Lahore water resources supplies? These are two concerns which I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So maybe first Mr. Youngbo and then over to Amy, and we appreciate brief answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very important question. We have the similar problems for the Yellow River, how to coordinate the different stakeholders and also to how to integrate the water resources, say from the raining water, surface water, and groundwater. Actually, this kind of resources was governed by different ministries of China. So that's just not a problem from our ministry, Ministry of Water Resources. So now the strategy we are taking on is that under the umbrella of the central government, this master plan, each individual ministries, they have to take their own responsibilities to make contributions to the overall water resources management. Say for the surface water or for the river itself, it's mainly the responsibility of Ministry of Water Resources. And for groundwater, we are going to working together with the Ministry of Natural Resources or Ministry of Ecology and Environment. So which makes the joint efforts from different stakeholders towards the common target. So that's basically a simple answer. Thanks very much.
And Amy, please, on the rainwater harvesting in cities, etc.
Hi, Stefan. Sorry, my sound did cut out a little bit there, so I didn't hear much of the question. But we didn't look specifically into rainwater storage in cities as one of those specific areas of analysis. We were looking across, supply solutions, and but it was really quite higher level of where do we prioritize our investments and our efforts in terms of whether that's at the institutional level, at the data collection level, at even infrastructure investment more broadly, and rather than at those specific, more technical, as you would say, I guess, IWRM solutions at the city scale. So we did not get into that level of detail in this specific project.
Thank you very much, Amy. Usman, would it be now appropriate to invite Mr. Saif Anjum as a chief discussant to share some reflections?
Sure, Stefan.
Yeah? Okay, then it's a pleasure to introduce Mr. Saif Anjum. Very briefly, he's a senior officer at the Pakistan Administration Service. He's currently serving as the Secretary of Environment Protection at the Department Environment Protection, so the name of the department, the government of Punjab. Previously, he served as the Secretary of the Irrigation Department, also the government of Punjab. He held a number of senior administrative roles as the Special Secretary of Home Department. He was also the Director General of the Sasti Roti Authority and the PSO to the Chief Minister of Punjab. He has been involved in international collaboration with the Asian Development Bank, USAID, DFID/FCDO, and a number of other international players and donors working on policy reform processes in Pakistan. Mr. Arjun holds a master's degree on policy and management from the University of Manchester in the UK. Please, Mr. Arjun, over.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful to the host for giving me an opportunity to offer my views on the IWRM principles from a practitioner's point of view. Now, it is important that it is from a practitioner's point of view and a practitioner who is placed in a developing country with low income levels. Well, before going to the topic itself, let me start with what Punjab is. Punjab is the largest province in Pakistan. It has a population of around 120 million. It is the land of 5 rivers. The Indus Basin system, which comprises of the 5 rivers, all of them flow through Punjab. And they are truly the lifeline of Punjab and Pakistan's economy. Just to cite Punjab, the agriculture, the irrigated agriculture, it contributes to around 20% of the national GDP, and it implies 52% of the labor force. Punjab is truly the bread basket for Pakistan, and all this happens because of the irrigation department's continuous efforts. We have an irrigation system which extends to over 26,000 miles of canals. We have thousands of miles of drainage systems and thousands of miles of flood embankments, which work in an integrated manner, we suppose. And they are, in fact, they provide a kind of assurance that the agriculture is going to continue, and this would fuel the engine for the other sectors of the economy. Well, we also know that water resources in Pakistan, and so in the case of Punjab, are under stress. There's an issue of quality. There's also an issue of quantity. Especially our groundwater resources, they are under an all-time high stress. We divert around 50% of the waters which flow through the Indus Basin system annually. It is more than 50 million acre feet which we divert into our irrigation system. Further, 48 MAF of water is pumped through 1.2 million pumps which are installed by the irrigators themselves privately. So the total irrigation water requirement in Punjab is around 100 MAF plus. So, and this is going to increase in future because the population is increasing at a rate of 2.3%. So we expect that the water resources in Pakistan would become more stressful. We've already hit the water scarcity level, and as I said earlier, the quality of the water resources, both in terms of surface water resources and the groundwater resources, is not very enviable. Now, coming to the integrated water resource management. Well, from a practitioner's point of view, I think that the realization that water is an economic resource, it is finite, it is very limited, has been there since antiquity. And there had been contests over water, and we see that all the major civilizations, they have grown along the rivers, be it with the civilization in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, or here in Indus Valley. The evidence is sufficient to suggest that the water was used in a very integrated way, even in the Indus Valley civilization. The people knew how to use water for domestic purposes, for bathing, for running their household taps. They had sewage systems. They used water for agriculture, and they also used water as a source for commerce and trade. And the civilization, Indus Valley civilization, is supposed to have trade links with Mesopotamia and many other parts of the world. So the concept that the water is to be used as an economic commodity, and it is to be used in an integrated way, has existed since antiquity. Well, there was also a notion of respect for water. It was ingrained into the society in form of the moral codes and the religious code. Ganges is a very sacred river for Hindu religion. So there was all cutting across respect for water and the need to conserve it to the maximum level, not to waste it. Well, this tradition continued. Even when the British came here and we embarked on a vast network of irrigation network in this part of the world, so the approach was always integrated. When the water was being diverted from the rivers for irrigation, it led to accumulation of the aquifer, created the groundwater resources of fresh water, which is being tapped now. And there was also, in parallel with the canal system, the drainage systems were also brought up, because everybody knew, every engineer knew that when the water levels are going to rise to a level, it is going to affect the agriculture. So this whole system was designed in a very integrated way. Of course, at that time the water was abundant and the stress on the water was very low. If I can go further into the history of this region, we had the Indus Basin Treaty. And that Indus Basin Treaty, worked on integrated management of the basin, not only at the level of a province, but at the level of the whole region. And it was an international treaty. We know that India and Pakistan, they jointly manage Indus Basin water. So this is, again, an illustration that the water, the concept that the water has to be used in an integrated way has existed since very long. Now, if we could place the history, the roots of the present concept of IWRM to the Dublin principles, which were illustrated by first speaker on this workshop today, which came in early 1990s. There were two elements which were brought in, which I think are very important, and which were not as important in the earlier periods. And these two are sustainability and the environmental entitlements of water. So these were the two new things. If we look into the Indus Basin Treaty, it doesn't talk much about sustainability, and it doesn't talk at all about environmental uses of water. It just talks about water as an economic resource and principally to be used for agricultural reasons. So these two dimensions are new, and they're very critical. But the first ambiguity from the practitioner's point of view, which comes in my mind, and it might infuse the curiosity of every other practitioner as well. So what if IWRM is altogether a new approach, or it is a continuation of what we were doing earlier, but in a more sophisticated, more well-reasoned and a better way? So this is something which this ambiguity has to come. Now, talking about the two new dimensions, which is just I mentioned, environmental uses and sustainability. Now, if we are in a developing world, so the main issue remains that where do we find resources to free up water for environmental use, and how do we have resources to make the system more sustainable? Environmental uses or environmental status of water has the same kind of issues as we have environmental in general. And we must all be, I think we are all familiar with the economic Kuznets curves, which principally state that when the economy is growing, so there is a more depletion of environmental resources because the economy is growing. And during this growth, the environmental concerns are not very highly placed in the overall national priority list. So the environment is at the losing end. But when there is sufficient economic wealth which is created, there is a surplus to invest on the environmental issues. So there is the tipping point. And after that tipping point, the environmental issues are addressed at both the political level and at the common person's level, and the environmental conditions start improving. So this is what we see happening in China. This is what we see happening in Europe. Unfortunately, being in the developing country, we are on a trajectory which is nowhere near the tipping point. So we have to be mindful that if we are going to talk about environmental issues on water, in its quality of water, ensuring sustainability. So from where these additional resources are going to come? So that's a fundamental area which needs to be addressed. Then there are other minor issues which basically pertain to tactical concerns at the institutional level. We know that there has to be a robust framework where all the institutions, they work together for an integrated water resource management approach. These institutions have to be developed. Then we also need to build knowledge base. Unless we have appropriate information set, we can't take the right decisions. But all this is going to happen. Firstly, putting aside resources for environmental concerns and sustainability concerns relating to water. So from the resources are going to come from the combined national pool. So this is never going to happen unless we generate a political will, unless the political decision makers assign due priority to these issues. So the fundamental question, the key to solving this enigma is creating a political will. Unless we have the political will and we keep emphasizing on putting aside resources for integrated water resource management in the way we envisage water resource management to be, so it is going to be taken as an exogenic agenda. It is something which is driven from outside rather than a home-brewn agenda. So this mismatch, actually what it translates into a IWRM policy which lies on the shelf, which is on the paper, and which is nowhere to be seen in practice. So if we want a good IWRM, which is going to be a functional IWRM with its benefits reaching down to the communities, we need to divert resources, and we need to, for that, we need to generate political will. And that political will is going to come through public mobilization. Unless the people would recognize that water pollution, sustainability of water resources is their daily life concern, they will never demand for integrated water resource management and the funds which are going to be coming for that. So it all boils down to a holistic policy which should focus on grassroots levels, informing and educating the people that the IWRM is going to benefit them ultimately. So I think unless we tackle this issue from the grassroots level, the highly sacred and highly appreciated objectives of IWRM will not be achieved. I don't know whether I've addressed the issues clearly or these are just random thoughts, but this is what I had to say. Thank you very much for listening to this patiently.
No, thank you very much. This was a very helpful reflection from on the ground experiences. I think that was very, very helpful. Usman, I can't look into the audience. Do we have time for one or two quick questions from the audience, or should we close up? We are 15 minutes behind the schedule, but we also started the session late.
Yeah, probably Yasmin has to go to other session, but we quickly take one question and then you can move forward.
If there's one question for the audience, before we move on to the closing remarks, if you could kindly moderate that.
Yeah, my name is Kahraman Jumabayev. I work for IWMI Central Asia office, and I would like to thank Mr. Saif Anjum, Secretary Irrigation Department of Punjab. I think he highlighted very good points. IWRM is a process, but when you are implementing it in a grassroots level, there are a lot of issues emerge, and you need some enabling environment in order to, improve sustainable implementation of IWRM. We have actually implemented one project in Central Asia, integrated water resource management in Fergana Valley project, and we spent there about 10 years, to introduce and to prepare this IWRM plans for 3 countries of Central Asian countries. So I would like to ask from our presenters, what do you think what should be first priority in order to sustainable introduction of this IWRM principles in any river basins, and what do you think, what are the preconditions, to achieve acceptance by governments and other stakeholders in introduction of IWRM? Thank you.
Stephen, over to you.
Well, it's more a question for Mr. Adjum, and I can invite everybody after lunch. There will be a presentation by Dr. Kakramon, who just asked the question on his experiences from Central Asia. But Mr. Anjum, can you can you respond to that quickly? I understand it's a very wide question. I'm not sure if you are near a microphone, no?
Well, I think I did answer this question when I was trying to make my address. I think unless the concept and the money to operationalize the concept is made available, so we will not be able to move ahead. And to make sure, when we all know how the governments work, we have political parties, and those political parties vote on people's consideration, people's priorities. So we need to mobilize people at the grassroots level. They should absorb these principles. They should think that environmental aspects and sustainability aspects of water are very high to their lives. So then they will make that push. The political parties would allocate funds for sustainability and improving the quality of water. And that's how we would be able to do the IWRM. As I said earlier, I think in Punjab, we are already managing our water resources in an integrated way. As I explained, the canals, the flood embankments, the drainage networks, the pumping of the groundwater, and the effort to recharge groundwater and to regulate it. They're all already in hand. They go in hand. We as human beings never take decisions considering one factor. It happens when I'm crossing a road, I look towards left, right, front, back, then I calculate speed, and then I cross. So we always make decisions by considering all relevant elements. And when we are taking decision in water sector, we take all those aspects into consideration. Some of the aspects seem to be ignored. It is not that they are being ignored for the sake of ignoring. It is because we do not have enough funds to address them. So if we do not have funds to address those critical areas, so they seem to get unnoticed and they seem to prevail. So the situation is not that. The decision makers know these things, but they can't really have their go because they don't have enough capacity to do that. So that's what I'm trying to say. My humble view. Thank you.
Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anjun. That was a very to-the-point reflection, and I will think about you when I cross a road next time. And if we do all these comprehensive assessments before we make decisions in water management is a good comparison, I believe. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a pleasure now to invite the final speaker of this session today, Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui. Ms. Siddiqui is the Director for Agriculture and Natural Resources at for the region Central and West Asia at the ADB, the Asian Development Bank. Ms. Siddiqui has a really wide experience as a chartered civil engineer and a postgraduate degree in irrigation engineering. She has worked for some 25 years in natural resources management, including IWRM, irrigation, knowledge solutions, developing them, but also applying them to real-world cases. And she has been leading a number of different teams at the ADB. With this, I would like to invite Yasmin for presenting her closing remarks. Over, please.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and warm greetings to all of the participants today, to development partners, colleagues, government representatives. I sincerely thank our keynote speakers and discussant for engaging in what I consider to really have been a very lively and engaging session on IWRM principles and opportunities in the context of water governance and climate change risks. We've heard today very much about the significant challenges that Pakistan faces in sustainability and productively managing its resources. Really, it's about how do we find solutions. And I think today the panelists, the participants have really shared some of those insights. I have 4 concluding remarks. Firstly, as mentioned just most recently in the response from Saif Sahab, the water resources sector really does require holistic and strategic solutions to modernize how water is managed. I think we're all aware that the business as usual, as we often hear, and incremental approaches, which are very much infrastructure focused, will no longer be relevant. And here I always have this phrase in mind from a colleague, a former head of the Australian Water Partnership, who many years ago came to ADB and said in one of the presentations that you cannot build yourself out of scarcity. And that was very much the Australia experience, that by just infrastructure alone, you're not going to find those solutions. And we heard that today in the presenter from PRC, from an excellent presentation on the Yellow River Basin, as well as the presentation from AITHA, about these examples of needing coordinated approaches which consider broader than just the infrastructure or hardware solutions. And whilst that can often be a preoccupation of many of us who work in water resources, we know the engineering side well. But as Professor van der Gleesen mentions, it's important to listen and learn from other users. I thought that was a very important point. And I think that's precisely what an IWRM approach is about. It is about looking and listening to the other water users. In terms of looking at integrated approaches, as highlighted by SEVSAB, importantly, it's about how you allocate resources. Where do you find those resources and how do you act across the various users? Secondly, the consideration of climate risks in IWRM solutions. And we've had much debate and dialogue recently in the COP26 meeting. And importantly, recently, the government of Pakistan's updated nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement prioritizes addressing climate change vulnerabilities of water resources, agriculture, and disaster preparedness. I think what is most important is to tie the two aspects. So we have the sector-related actions which practitioners, policymakers may be thinking about, and then we have the broader discussions on climate change. If not the most important point today, I would urge our participants, and especially policymakers and practitioners, to consider the provincial level context and how sector departments, government departments, need to support, develop, and implement sector level adaptation strategies and plans. So rather than having this divided dialogue where we talk about climate, its risks and adaptation, and we act at the sector level, really without building those in. This is where knowledge and incorporating best available approaches and scientific findings will be crucial. Thirdly, experiences of water resources management around the world, importantly from our Asia Pacific region, can serve as good guidance for Pakistan's future water resources management. I'm a great fan of seeing is believing and learning from others. And I think this event today has been an excellent opportunity to really listen to those experiences. Pakistan already has a very strong institutional background and history upon which it can build to further progress on water resources management. And we can see all the way from the field level with farmer organizations, all the way up to the Indus River System Authority at the highest level in terms of basin level management, the institutions are all there. The Pakistan National Water Policy 2018 also highlights integrated water resources management, though perhaps the context of sustainability and enhancing environmental aspects could be further strengthened. But here we can really draw on lessons from across our region. And I'm very thankful to the presenters today, not just from Australia, from the Yellow River Basin in the People's Republic of China, but we also have AITHA's insights from urban experiences. And I leave this as a point for thought on how we can further build bridges and bring in the experiences from our neighbors to share. I'm always advocating for this, but I do consider it one of the best ways of learning and applying experiences. Lastly, development partners bring expertise and, of course, that very important point about financing to support strengthening institutions, capacity building, and sharing technologies and latest practices. And ADB has played an important role over the past decades in Pakistan, most recently working with Punjab Irrigation Department on its institutional strengthening and transformation in line with Punjab's Water Policy 2018. As individual entities, we alone, however, cannot support and deliver on those solutions. And it's important that we consider the power of partnership. Hence our participation today in this event, which truly highlights how partnerships and joining hands can influence and can further strengthen what we would like to deliver. The International Water Management Institute, academia such as TU Delft, Australian Water Partnership, Lessons from the Yellow River Basin, and policy specialists such as AITHA provide multiple perspectives from which we can support federal and provincial governments of Pakistan. I believe that by joining hands and importantly having champions such as Saif Sahab amongst us today, we can lead to this transformation. And importantly, the time is now. We need to work together. So setting the ambition is the first step. And I expect this forum provides that perfect opportunity to take a more rigorous and clear direction. I urge our distinguished participants from the highest levels of federal and provincial governments to consider how we can take the outcomes of this forum to the next step, which is actions. So from words to reality. And I leave that as my final point. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining this very lively and informative session today. I look forward to finding solutions together. And I wish you and your families good health as we come to the close of another challenging year, but look forward to a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for the very nicely put closing remarks. I think we all agree with you. We would like to thank everyone involved for organizing such a lively session with a lot of knowledge sharing. And yes, Yasmin, we hear you. How do we get to the next steps? How do we get from words to action? It's all up to us, and I'm looking forward to the upcoming sessions for the rest of the day. The next session will, Usman will announce when it will start, probably in 2 minutes. I don't think so. We have a coffee break now, and it will be a session in this room focusing on environmental flow and the way how essential they are for restoring the ecosystems at the Indus Basin. So thanks again for the closing remarks, and I'm looking forward to the next sessions, and I wish you a nice coffee break. Thank you. Bye-bye.